Hi there, this is Matthew from Artisan Games, and today I'm going to do one of the first tutorials for this channel, and I'm going to go over how I created the rock texture that I started talking about earlier in the dev blog cycle. And yeah, so basically I'll go over how I would generate one of these, also generate how I get the projecting sand, and in the end you'll be able to make some sort of material that will fit whatever you need it to fit, that will have you be fully customizable. Alright, so what I'll do is I'll go step by step through what I have done, and I'll demonstrate and show you and talk about it on screen rather than making it, just because we can eliminate a lot of actual shader compiling time. Alright, now this is the overall material. It seems very daunting, but we'll be okay. We're going to get into this and break down step by step. Okay? Now a couple of key points. I use customize materials that I've made by baking. So what we can do is first off talk about this, or texture, not material. Now I call them a cat material. The cat material contains curvature, ambient occlusion, and a thickness map. So you will need to bake a texture to fit the red, green, and blue channels. Now, I use Substance Painter to do that. So if you do have Substance Painter, then that's great. If you don't have Substance Painter, I'm not going to teach you how to do this entire thing, but you can bake those maps off individually in Blender. I've just opened up Blender. So you can bake these maps off individually in Blender from a high poly sculpt. So we'll go into Rockkit. For example, this is like one of the rocks. What you can do is have the high poly, and then this will be the low poly, and you would use the settings, in the baking settings, and you would bake down onto this texture. What it will give you though is slightly different. It will give you black and white images when you do the bakes, and you can actually add black and white images together in a Photoshop, or I believe you can also do it in GIMP, which is a free software, and that's just layering those black and white textures into your RGB channels. If you do want, I can do another tutorial on like how to do that. It's just for this entire talking about this material a little bit long. It's a long process trying to sort all those and do all those things. So I'm going to presume you have a high poly model, and I presume you also have baked it, or can bake it, and can create those textures. You don't necessarily need those textures for all these steps. There are a couple of different things, as in like the projecting the sand into the crevices sort of thing. You don't really need those bakes, although I do have a couple of interesting fun things that I do have on top of that with using this system. Alright, so cat, curvature, ambient occlusion, and thickness map. And then we got our normal, which is our normal. So you will need to bake a normal, and you can bake a normal from a high poly, or you can make one. And then of course I use a tileable texture, which I have actually baked down, very similar to the RGB channels. That's the normal, and this is the texture. This is like a masking, and and I can actually show you the texture and how it works. So this is the texture. Now it may look bizarre, but if we actually look at it in its individual channels, you'll see that it's quite different. And that's the point of the entire thing, is to try to get and utilize the most out of any given texture. And I can teach you a couple of interesting tricks you can do with these as well, which I'm doing and using the hero shader, because you do have your RGB. You could also create your alpha if you wanted to use an alpha channel, but you also have the addition of black and white if you know how to mask those out. So you can actually get a lot of different layers in one image. So yeah. All right. So we got those as our textures, okay? You got your tileable texture. So if you want to, you don't have to do what I've done. You don't have to do the customized texture. You can have just a normal tileable texture. You can have a normal map. And you don't necessarily need to have the cat, but I would suggest using it because you can get some really fun, interesting things going on. Okay, so what I have done is I broke this down into using lerps. Now lerps will help you blend between two values, and you use a mask map to do so. So we'll go through and run through this. So at the moment I'm grabbing, for my first blend, I'm actually grabbing the tileable texture here. I'm masking it using a mask node, which you can type up here, which is the mask component. You don't necessarily need to use a mask component. You can just draw straight from the red channel, and it will work the same, though I just, for making it clean and clarity and all that, I like to just use it, and it doesn't really add anything to this entire performance because it gets auto converted anyway, so it's the same thing. Now the way that the lerp is actually working is we have a base color. So you got the base is the A, and then you've got the what you're putting on top, what you're layering in. So what we'll do is we will start preview. We'll preview this. So what's black on this will be this. So because this is what we're layering on top. We're layering this image on top with in the B channel. So that's what we'll do first. The reason why you want to generally start off with your bigger blocks, I guess, of like texturing. So like as you see, I did a whole bunch of different channels. This section, by the way, is only to help if you want to have a customized color texture. So if you don't want to, and you already have a color texture and it's already preset, you don't actually do any of this. But if you want to have the ability to customize and create your own color textures, you do this. So you layer this, and now from here we have a nice kind of colored gradient. So the dark cracks will be this nice cracked brown, and then inside on the top of that will be this lighter brown color. And then of course we'll like move over to our next. Now this lerp takes that cracked brown and takes this image, and then you're lerping from down here. Now you don't need to, like, this power of 2 is just there to get the type of black and white image I desired. So it's not an it's just a edit. Start previewing this. This is from the blue channel up here, but you'll also notice that there are spots that are quite odd, which are these. And that's because inside of this texture here, I'm also combining a piece from my cat map, which the G channel that I'm using is ambient occlusion, cat C-A-T, yay, ambient occlusion. So our ambient occlusion, what I have done here is I take from the ambient occlusion and as you can see, the ambient occlusion, we've got white, which will be the color showing, which is an issue because we want to color in that, we want to color in the dark sections. So we want to color in this darker lines. We don't want to color in the white. So what we do, and we also want to do a couple of adjustments to this. Alright, so we'll stop previewing. So what we want to do first is we want to increase the intensity of the black and white. So I use a power node to increase that intensity and make the blacks more black and the whites more white. So we'll start previewing that. As you can see, the blacks have got more black and the white is more white, which was pretty white to begin with, but more white. And then we use a -1 node. Now you can find a -1 node if you want by just going minus, and then you can find a simple -1 node above the subtract. Now what -1 node does is it inverts the image. So as you know before, we had black and then we had white, but we need to have the white and black, not the other way around, so we can color in the white section. So we'll start previewing this, which will make a little bit more sense. So we want to color in the white section, so everywhere that's white will be filled in with this darker crevice color, and that's what we want. And the black sections will be not filled in; they'll be masked out. So then we combine this, and what we're using an add and not multiply. And the difference is if you were to use a multiply, it would make the overall image darker because of blacks and greys will multiply over one another. Add will add the two together, which you'll see because we'll just start previewing this node. Alright, so now they're added and combined to one another, which you can see the crevices and the cracks get that get the white in it, and then of course it's then a light variations on top of the surface, and those variations on top of the black surfaces create different gradient patterns, which is quite nice, and that it isn't more desirable than less desirable, depending upon, I guess, your texture. So we've added those together, and just because this is a little intense, it does use a power node, another one. So we're going to make the whites more white, the blacks more black. And I'm pretty sure I said start previewing that. Oh yeah, I can't multi-preview. So as you can see, the white's more white, black's more black. You'll find that it's actually cleaned up like a couple of those crevices and cracks and stuff. You'll notice that also there is some like softer lines and harder lines, and yeah, and that's your desired result. So ultimately, in the end, this fills into this lerp here, and this actually gives it more shape and more identifying marks in those crevices. So as you can see, this crevice here is actually utilizing a similar sort of masking technique, because this is how this actual that's the actual AO, that's the ambient occlusion working for the sand. So I actually use the AO to tell this projection to actually fill in those cracks. I also do a couple other things, but we'll get to that. But as you can see, that's how you get that darker section inside the cracks. You'll even see those in the other models. Like down here, there's a lighter gradient that's on the edges that moves inwards, and there are also darker gradients from in like crevices that move out, and it just gives it more body and shape. Because these are very low poly models, and they're meant to be more for background scenery, so they're perfectly fine. Like being jagged, like it's just more from a distance. Does it look good? Which it does. So we'll move on to the next stage. So we've filled in the cracks. All right, so we've now got a nice kind of texture that's got two tones to it. Now it's got also some nice crevice details. This is where I use another one of the cat maps, and I'm using this on the corners. And if you remember, I was just mentioning how there's a little bit of a softer bleed in from the corners that's lighter. Alright, so if I zoomed up here, it's actually more noticeable on some of the rocks from a distance. So you can see on this rock here, it's got this lighter tint, and then it moves in towards the middle, and then this is all yeah, it's all like just a normal kind of brown. Now this is like you'll find it's kind of typical inside of like rocks to have like the corners more lighter, and that's generally because of how moisture works, and like the thinner sections get dried out and the inner rock doesn't, so you can get that sort of general effect. It also just looks nice. These are just, and you know, this is a stylized technique, so but you can get some more high-end looking, like you just have to, I guess, be more precise and careful about how you're applying your colors. So to get this, we'll just jump down the chain, and then we just grab it straight from the thickness map. So I'll show you what the thickness map does. We'll start previewing that. And as you can see, the thickness map is really light. And the dark sections of this thickness map are actually more to do with the crevices. You could use the thickness map to, like an AO, to get those crevices, though AOs are slightly different and how they're baked. So there's some like trade-offs. AOs generally also like take into account more how things are clustered together and how dark certain sections can get. Where thickness maps are just based on the thickness between points. So you'll find that the lighter section, the white, is where it is the thinnest, or where it's thin-ish, I guess, and then the dark sections is where it gets a bit more thick. I found that just using the map itself as it is perfect. So I didn't continue to modify that. But a couple of things you could do to modify it is use a power node. As I said, would intensify or detensify the color, giving you like more impactful gradients. You could also use the cheap contrast node, which I don't mind. I use actually kind of a fair bit. We got the cheap contrast node. A cheap contrast node. I'm not 100% sure how cheap it is, but it seems reasonably cheap. Cheap contrast node will actually make it stronger, so the gradient will be sharp and more blunt with how it actually will transfer. And another one you could use is also multiply, which will just multiply itself upon itself. But the whites will and could get more dark, which might make it a bit more muddier. So that's up to you. And so we've went through that. Then that is basically the colors of the actual material. That's the color setup for the basic part of the rock. Now this is the emissive section, and I will run you through the emissive section more briefly. Please comment down below if you wanted to know more about the emissive section. But yeah, so in the emissive section, what we're using is actually the contrast nodes that I was talking about earlier. The contrast node will adjust how sharp it is in those crevices, and for me to get those crevices, I use the blue section of my crack map, and I could actually bring up that map once again, and if we went to the viewer and we went to blue, you would notice that the white, don't worry about what's in the middle. The white section is what we want. These are the cracks of the actual sculpt, the tile texture. So we want those. So that's where we grab that, and then we come in here and then we contrast it. As soon as we contrast it, it will just give us the contrast. So it will give us the white cracks and it will give us the black rock, which is what we want. And we add that to a combination of these others, which this here draws actually from the rock itself. And that's why a cat map is really great, because this will draw from the rock itself. We're using a power node to intensify those colors, and down here we're inverting it and we're utilizing the alpha, the ambient occlusion, I mean. And as you will see in the ambient occlusion, it's about how much the crevice details. So what we're basically doing is we're taking from that crevice details, and then we are intensifying that, inverting that, so that the white is the actual crevices, because we're painting in the crevices. And so now we're painting in the crevices, and then we have further clamping values, so that the player can customize, or not a player, like yourself can customize the rock and create multiple different instances. And then from there, I'm using a lerp. Now you can use a switch node. So for these sort of things, you can use a switch to switch things on and off. I'm using a lerp just because I find it easier, and I also find that it gives me still more flexibility where I can adjust how much is glowing from the crevices. So using a lerp, there's nothing in the base, and there's it's all just about the crack value. And then the lerp value is basically 1 to 0. 1 is on and 0 is off. Alright, so then we add these together, and as you noticed, we were talking about earlier, like adding is just taking two and putting them together. Multiplying is overlaying them, and they can get darker. So we don't want them to get darker, we want them to stay the same, we just want them to be melded together. So we add. Then we take that add, and then we're doing another lerp again, and the add, this because this is the black and white, this is the mask. This will be the mask in our lerp channel, and then we're applying here blue, well, an aqua, and then we're multiplying it. Now the reason why we're multiplying it here is this will be the intensity of the emissive glow. I'm using 25, but it can be more or less. Just realize that the more sharp your alpha is, so the more white the white is and the more black the black is, the less kind of interference you'll have when you are masking and using your emissive. If you're finding you're cranking your emissive channel, like your emissive intensity, like up really high, it generally means that your masking and your mask isn't good. It's filtering out a lot of that intensity. So your computer's doing a lot more processing unnecessarily because of those filtering layers. So you don't need to do that. Just be careful when you're doing that. And then at the end is, as I was talking about earlier, there's a switch on for the overall entire emissive material. So I can switch this entire material on and off. Unlike what I was doing back here, which wasn't switching the entire material on and off, it was switching the layer of the cracks of the rock to the texture cracks, which are two different things. So we've got the rock, and as you can see, I could have glowing sections in here, or I could have the glowing sections in the tileable texture, which are these on here. Two different things, so I made it have the option to switch them on and off, because sometimes you might not want to have cracks. You might want to have glowing in your cracks. You might want to have like snow or moss or something inside those instead of having it glowing. So it gives you the options. Options are nice, and that goes into the emissive. And beyond that, this particular type of material doesn't use metal roughness or like specular and stuff like that. If you wanted to have an object and you wanted to also contain those different map types, I would generally suggest at least using metal and roughness. I use blank variables just to dictate an entire roughness and metallic over the top. But if you had texture maps, yeah, bring in your texture maps. I'd probably layer them as I've done with the cat map, and I would have a layered other map for that. That is getting a little bit more with textures, though I do kind of only count these as like a 2.5, because if you are using this type of material across multiple rocks everywhere, then you'll find that this starts saving you in the sense of memory management. It doesn't save you memory management if you're only using it a couple of times in a level. If you're using it everywhere, which I'm using these everywhere, then you're going to find that it saves you a lot more, because instead it starts to become I've loaded up 2 tileable textures, and then I only load up the normal and the cat map for any given object. Which is less objects overall, because I use the object multiple times in different ways, and I can apply different materials, instances of it to make it look different. So yeah, that's pretty much the first section. So quick recap of the first section of this is we started using and setting up tileable texture colors, and we lerped between them, creating a base color, which would be basically your base texture for that object. We also went over the emissive, and then we added them. This here is a make material node, which we will use and merge with other materials. And I'll go through that in the next section. Thank you for watching this part. Please let me know what you think of this kind of format of talking about tutorials. If it's something that you found helpful, or something you would like me to be doing that you would find helpful, please let me know. Okay. I will be also recording the next part after this, so I'll see you in the next section. All right. Bye.